Well, hello again, and again, if there's anyone out there that actually wants to learn with me and kind of both ask questions, but also help me understand and kind of like help us learn together, that would be really, really cool. So, when we're saying Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or Vayehi Or, so we're basically telling the story in many layers of this. Let's pay attention to light. Until now, it was there, but we weren't paying attention to it. And in many ways, like we were saying last week, it's a story about saying that give opportunity for goodness, give opportunity for like many, many times in the Hebrew language, it correlates, and it's true also in English, that the word light represents beauty, goodness, and things of that nature. So when we're saying let there be light, we're also saying let goodness be there. And then we move on to the next paragraph, which is of today, which says, "Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov, ve'avdel Elohim ben haor uven hachoshech." And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So, one of the stuff, and like phonetically, this is probably the right way to translate it, but if we look at it word by word again, and we look at the first sentence, the first word itself is the vowel of the sentence. Vayal kind of like is he saw, but it's in the past tense. Vayal, it almost, in a few ways, in one of the stuff is like, if I just notice something, I wouldn't say, or if I wanted to say that God just noticed something, I would say, Vayir'eh Elohim et haor. If God for the first time, I would say it in a present tense in Hebrew. It's kind of complicated to translate that. But if I really wanted to say that God was looking at the light, physically looking at the light, I wouldn't use that word. I would use the tense of saying an actionable tense, and not a tense that's more implies of something more theoretical. So we're not talking about God really looking at the light. We're now talking about something that must be deeper than that, and there's a few different ways of reading it if we go under the assumption that this sentence does not say, and God saw the light. So if we're looking at Vayar Elohim et haor, we could translate it also in another way of saying, and God feared for the light. Because there's a word in Hebrew which is called Ir'ah, which is the first three letters, Yud Resh Aleph. They are also a word that's used to say fear. And it's not only for looking at something. Beyond that, if the last sentence we said that God talked, and this sentence we saw that God saw, then we're starting to see all these different senses. So the first sense of talking, and the second sense of looking and paying attention to something. So it's more of kind of like, this is kind of like a hybrid explanation. And I would say that what we're looking at here is, I believe, we're not really talking about light at all. We're talking about this goodness that exists. And God, for the first time now, has awareness. And as he has this awareness, he could see good. And because he doesn't want to speak about bad things, he's talking about that he could see good. But he sees it and he fears for it. He doesn't fear the light itself. He fears for the light. And why does he fear for the light? Because it was good. And that's where it makes a lot more sense, because it would be silly to say that the point of the sentence would be to say that God said the light was good, unless there was a deeper layer to it of, could it be that the light wasn't good? Because I would assume that light is good. If I see light, I think light is a good thing. Our natural reaction, both as the readers, would be to assume that when you see light, that it's a good thing. That the day is shining is a good thing. We don't assume that you're in the middle of the desert and the sun came up, and then for you specifically, that's one of the worst feelings, that the sun well, the first few minutes it's really good because you're warming up, and then the middle of the day comes, and then it's really horrible, right? But the point of it is that it seems more logical because there's no negativity here. It seems here that God, if I would say that God saw the light and he saw that it was good, and it doesn't connect. But on the other hand, if I say it in a way that says God feared for the light because it was good, it connects really, really well with the last sentence, because in the last sentence, we say that God created the light, and the light was there. And when the light was there, God feared for it. And again, to put the point down, God doesn't create the light. God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. And when he said, "Let there be light," he feared for that light because it was good. Kind of hinting that there are forces out there that want to hurt the good. And God wanted to protect it. And how did he figure out how to protect the goodness? Moves on to the next sentence. And God divided the light from the darkness. So, Ve'avdel Elohim ben ha'or ve'en ha'choshech. So, again, looking at the word Vayal, and we met already the word Elohim, and we could see et ha'or, and in the Hebrew Bible, the two words are connected, even though usually they're not connected, which again opens up opens up my mind, it opens up my thinking of saying, okay, so why was there's this importance of connecting the connector word, which et is the connector word. Translated into English, it would be something similar to, it's not a word that exists in English. If you look at literally word by word, and we go back to Vayal, Vayal is that we said or feared for, or looked at in a past tense. Elohim is God, or a plural of God. The word Eloha is God, and Elohim is as odd as that sounds, Elohim is actually more than one God, but Elohim is one God. So it's kind of like this kind of like play on words where God is both plural and one. He's just one thing. He's all these forces combined, which again hints over and over to the idea that God is not separated. He's not like the first name that is used for God is not a separator name. It's almost like a name of inclusion. It's like it's a name of inclusion. There's no better way of describing it. And then when we're saying et also, we're saying et just doesn't have a translation in English. It's a connector word. So it's and God saw the, you would say, even though it's not the, it's really a word that you only use as a glue between words. It's almost saying you could say it's the, but it's not the. Because actually, ha is the in Hebrew. The hey, the letter here that connects to the word o, is the hey. So the hey here is that connector letter is the. So et just doesn't exist in the English language, and it's just an important connector word. And the need to add another connector dash that says that this connector is really connected to the light must imply to us the importance that the main topic is the light. So God feared. Not God feared the light, but God feared for the light because it was good. Now, God wouldn't fear the light because it was good. God would fear for the light because it was good. All right, so we got that out of our way. And if we look next to the word, kitov, because it's good, and again, it's connected together, and it even more so implies that there's a causality here, that everything is connected to each other. And again, I really don't believe that this is the literal translation of protecting the source of light or energy. This is the story of protecting the goodness in the creation. That there's something good here, there's something negative here. They're both together, but because I care about the good, I'm not going to talk about the bad at all. I'm only going to talk about the good, and I'm going to try to figure out how am I going to solve that goodness, how I'm going to protect that goodness, how I'm going to make it bloom and get better. And then we move, and then again, we move into the word ve'avdel, and ve'avdel is an action that is again a play on words, because it's not, and this is actually really important, that most of the variables that are defining God so far, you can't see that in English at all, but all of these variables are not past tense, they're always kind of future present tense in Hebrew. Basically meaning that if it's written in that way, it's implying that it's something that is happening. It's not something that happened in the past and stopped. It's something that is existing. So the separation is still happening according to the literal translation if we're looking at it at that time. So what is actually happening? So God is separating between the light and the darkness. And again, you could go for it very naturally and say that it's separating between the light, which is the goodness, and the darkness, which is the negativity, the bad. God put something to try to protect the goodness. And now you might wonder to yourself, what is that goodness? I don't really know, but I believe that would probably, if we see this causality of this progression, there's a good chance that we'll discover what that is in the next sentence. So again, if we just go all the way back to the beginning and just run through it with the understanding of our last understanding. So Bereshit bara Hashamayim doubts. First, God, I would say, first God was. That was, that's one of the. First, God created earth and the sky, or first God or first God was created with the earth and the sky. It really just depends on how you want to read it. And then it describes earth, and it describes that earth was a chaos and full of darkness, and it was full of a lot of things that seem kind of scary. But the Spirit of God was floating on the face of the water, and it doesn't say that God created the water, nor does it say in any place that God created earth or that created the sky. It says that God was floating. It's almost as if it's floating on the face of the earth, on the face of the water, which seems interesting to say it in that way. And again, because we're kind of looking at this idea of like, okay, what is God? Is God everything? Is God something that you could point down? And when you're looking at this at these early stages of creation, it seems that there is some level of separation between the Spirit of God and the physicality of whatever is on earth at that moment in time. And then God says, let there be light, and there was light. And then we got to the place that God feared for the light because the light was good. And because light was good, he tried to find a solution. And the solution was to separate, or to find ways to create separation between good and bad, or between positive and negative, or between real darkness and lightness, to create a separation between them. And one of the stuff that scholars write about is that the light and darkness existed together literally, and I don't think that's accurate. I think you can't have complete darkness and complete light at the same time, but at the same time, when we're looking into nature and we're looking into humanity, there aren't scenarios where light exists in a complete vacuum from darkness, nor does darkness almost ever exist in a vacuum of light, especially not where life is. So in many ways, there's a lot of different types of light, but there's also, the more the sun is up, the more shadows are on the ground, the more we create shadows. Even in that physical layer where, I think the story and that usage of the word light was because it's the most fluid way to explain the relationship between the light and the darkness, where the midday sun not only creates the most amount of light, but it creates the most amount of shadows, aka it creates darkness as well. So it's kind of like this relationship that we have in ourselves as well, of when we create good, with it we always create bad. And if we're not aware of it, we could think that we're doing good things, but actually create really bad things. And it's something in that is very inspirational, of saying that, every time when you create something, you need to be aware, you need to fear for that good that you're creating, because with it you're creating bad as well. You can't put all your focus on something and say, oh, this is good, I could do whatever, this, I'm going to do this because it's a good thing, and then do really, really bad things in the name of good. And, if connecting it, it's kind of like funny, that now in the news that there's the stories about, the Christian movement here in the United States, or the whole story about gay marriage, and I'm not going to get into that. But it seems so silly that a group of religious people are trying to force their opinions on someone else because they believe it's good. And I could respect that. And going even under assumption that I would respect that they feel that they're doing something good by doing that. But it seems very funny that the way that they showcase it is by eating in a fast food chain, eating chickens in a fast food chain, which for me is kind of like the exact opposite of goodness. When I go to a fast food chain, I go there in shame. I don't go there in joy. I know how animals are mistreated in fast food chains. I know how chickens are abused and used as not as God creatures, but they're used as produce. We erased our relationship with nature. So it's kind of funny that in the name of good, and I believe that they do think that they're doing good, their action of protest is the definition of doing something bad. You know, if their action was to sit in the, to go 1 million people out and sit in the middle of I don't know, like Times Square and read a passage in the Bible, I would say like, wow, that's impressive. I don't have to agree with what they're doing, but their actions would justify it, or if they would all go to a shelter to help out, or if they all decide that one day of the week they're going to go out and they're going to help people in need in the name of wanting to protect marriage. I wouldn't disrespect that. I would not agree with their opinion. I personally do not believe in it. I believe in a lot of other stuff. But it's very interesting to see that, that's the first thought that came in my head, that a lot of times people, and I'm not looking at them in a negative light, is more looking at human nature in a negative light. We all tend to think that if we're doing something good, the causes don't matter as much. And what God is saying in the story, as the first story really, after saying that he wanted to protect goodness, is that he feared for goodness because it was good. And how did he protect the goodness? By separating between the good and the bad, by looking deeper into the light and understanding what are the good things that the light does, what are the bad things that the light does, and figuring out how to protect the good. So if you look at it in a natural progression of nature, I would say, the light couldn't produce life because the light was so strong. So God had to create a relationship between light and darkness to create a scenario where life would be conducive on Earth. Now, I have no idea because I'm not a scientist, but I'm not going to say much more beyond that because I'm not a scientist, but it seems like a very natural flow for me in my head. This is where it's taking me when I'm reading this, and I hope that you guys actually watch this and react to it, and I hope to hear from you and what you think about what we talked about today.